All right, so today what we're looking at is solving quadratic equations by factoring. Essentially what we're doing here is right where we left off in the last unit when we dealt with polynomials. In fact, the last day was factoring. That's what we're going to use today to solve quadratic equations. All right, and so to start off, what we're going to have to use is this thing called the zero product property. Sounds really complicated, but it's not. All the zero product property is saying is, well, the word product refers to the answer of a multiplication question, and zero is the answer that you're going to get. And so basically it's saying if you take two things and you multiply them and they give you an answer of zero, here's your scenarios according to the zero product property, which we're going to use. Well, the first thing is if you've got two things that are multiplied to give you zero, maybe the first thing is equal to zero. Or maybe the second thing is equal to zero. Or secret option C, maybe they're both equal to zero because 0 times 0 would equal 0. So that's all the product property is saying. Is if you get two things, you multiply them, you get a 0. One of them is 0 or both 0. So here's what we do for a quadratic equation. Again, the two steps that we are going to use to solve quadratic equations by factoring is, number one, you got to be able to factor. Number two, we're going to use that zero product property. And so example one here, what I've done is I've already factored the thing. Where I again have two pieces. This time it's not the A would be x minus 5, and the B would be an x plus 2. So that's a quadratic that's already been factored. Here's the next step, is that we just take the zero product property and we say, okay, if it's equal to 0, and that's key here, must have a 0 here. All right, which would I do? Well, that means, well, maybe A is equal to 0, so x minus 5 is equal to 0. Or maybe B is equal to 0. Or maybe they're both equal to 0. All right, so all of the zero product property is doing is giving us two equations. And I solve both equations. And so if I bring the negative 5 over to the other side, I get a positive 5. Bring the 2 over to the other side, I get a negative 2. And there's my two answers. Again, with a quadratic equation, solving it, you can get two answers, and we'll get into this. You can get one answer or you can get no answers, but most of the time you get two. Now, when we get over to example 2 now, and this is kind of where in the last unit you had to know how to factor, the three different types of factoring, and that's what I'm going to go through. And so in example 2, I want to solve 9x squared minus 16 equals 0. Now, the first thing I notice is, number one, there's two terms. That's it. I have a 9x squared, and I have a minus 16. Now, because those two terms, there is a minus sign in there, or the second one is negative. You could look at it that way. And they are both square rootable nicely. This is what we call a difference of squares factoring. And so, again, with a difference of squares factoring, which we did last unit, but we just didn't take it to the next step, I'm going to have two pieces. That's always what happens with factoring. And again, I got to make sure 0 on one side, right? Got to happen. Otherwise, I can't use this zero product property. And so with the difference of squares factoring, you get a plus sign in one of them and a minus sign in the other. It doesn't matter because we're multiplying. It doesn't matter which order they're in. But here's what does matter is where I put my terms. Because for a difference of squares factoring, I have to square the first term, which means I have to square the 9 and square the x squared. I square the 9, I get a 3. I square the x squared, I get an x. And so our first term is 3x, and because it's the first term that we square rooted, it goes in the first spot. So I got a 3x here and a 3x here. Again, the second term that's outside the negative sign is 16. I could square root it, and I get a 4. And because it's that second term, I'm going to put it in the second spot, this 4 that I got from square rooting 16. Now, again, that's what we did last unit, but now we're just taking a step farther and we're solving the quadratics using that zero product property. All right, so one of my equations is going to be 3x plus 4 equals 0, and the other one is going to be 3x minus 4 equals 0. All right, and then I'm going to solve these two equations. And so I'm going to bring the 4 over to the other side. And I got a negative 4. Again, dividing both sides by my numerical coefficient, which is the number in front of my variable. And I could leave this as a fraction or as a decimal, but it is x equals negative 4/3. All right, I got two equations, right? Two pieces with a quadratic. So I go over and solve my second piece, which again, this time I'm going to bring the minus 4 over to the other side. So it is now a positive 4. Again, divided by my numerical coefficient. And as often happens with difference of squares, you get the same number, but one positive and one negative. And so our two answers for solving this difference of squares is x equals negative 4/3 and x equals 4/3. All right, so there's a couple. Let's try a couple more. But again, a review of what we did last unit. So if you understood factoring last unit, this is easy. If not, well, it didn't go away. You got to learn it, especially later on in this unit, or I won't even say later on, soon in this unit. We are going to use factoring. All right, so example number 3. Again, we did a difference of squares. We had 3 different types of factoring. And so let's see here. I got example number 3. Okay. So I've got some words here. Maybe you did print it out. I'm not sure how many of you are printing it out, blank copy or even a copy. But here's example 3. It's a word problem. And it says the height of an air balloon is given by the equation h is equal to x squared plus 7x minus 30. All right, where x is time and h is the height in meters. Time is in seconds. At what time does the air balloon hit the ground? All right, so when we have a word problem here, we have 2 variables. And any time you are solving any equation in math, you got to know them all but one. And so because I have 2 of them, I know one of these, and I got to find the other one. And the question says here, at what time does the air balloon hit the ground? Secretly, that's telling you my h value is 0, because you have a height of 0 when you hit the ground. All right, so I'm going to, well, I almost already did, but I'm going to substitute that in. So I have 0 equals x squared plus 7x minus 30. Now I want to solve this quadratic equation. I got my 0 on one side. I need that to happen. And so I'm going to solve by factoring. All right, so no matter what method we use, we are going to have two brackets with 2 terms in there, or 2 polynomials in there. And again, I like to use a chart. All right, so some of you like decomposition. Again, I use the chart. To go through that again, your first term goes in the top left corner, x squared. Your last term, minus 30, got to watch the sign here. It goes in the top hand right. Now, this is an example of a quadratic, the easy ones I say, because there's a 1 in front of the x squared. The other ones are the hard ones. And the reason I say that they're the easy ones is because when you're doing your chart, when you have an x squared here, it's always going to be x and x. And so you only have to figure out half the chart instead of both sides. All right, now, I need 2 numbers to multiply to give me negative 30. And then when I crisscross, multiply or cross multiply and then add those terms together, I get a positive 7x. So I would look at something like, I don't know, a negative 10 and a 3. Those multiply to give me negative 30. But again, I have to cross multiply to see if it works, that if I get my 7x. So I have a minus 10x plus 3x. That's a minus 7x. Got the right number, opposite signs. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch this negative 10 to a positive 10, and now make this a minus 3. And so again, minus 3 times 10 is negative 30. Crisscross. Now I got 10x minus 3x. Bingo. I have my middle term, my 7x. And so my first term here is an x plus 10. And my second term is going to be an x minus 3. All right, there's the first step. I factored my quadratic. And now to solve it. So that's where the 0 product property comes into play, where I'm going to have one equation where I got x plus 10 is equal to 0. There's the first equation. And my other equation is x minus 3 equals 0. All right, so again, you're going to get two potential answers for a quadratic. All right, so I solved my first equation. I moved the 10 over to the other side. It becomes a minus 10. And on the second equation here, I move the negative 3 over this side, and I get a positive 3. All right, now here's the deal. This is a word problem. So I actually just don't come up with two answers. I got to see which one it is. Now, in this question, it's asking, at what time does the air balloon hit the ground? Well, this air balloon only hits once, right? Fortunately, it doesn't hit, lands, hopefully. And so one of these answers, it can't land twice. And so when I look at it, and I have to analyze it, because again, it's a word problem, this negative 10 here, negative 10 seconds, you can't have negative time. So I am going to put a line through this answer, but you just can't say, oh, I don't like that answer. The reason is no negative time. There's no such thing as negative time. All right? And so therefore, the air balloon lands after, man, I have that in 3 seconds or hours here? Seconds, it looks like. Yikes. After 3 seconds. All right, so if there is a word problem, you have to interpret your results. And if there's a case where you have two answers and you're only getting one, you have to say why you're getting rid of the answer. You can't have negative time. If you take my physics class, Albert Einstein proved that. All right, can't have negative time. Can't go back in time. All right, so the air balloon lands after 3 seconds. Should probably change that to hours next time we do this question. All right, next one. Any questions about that first before I move on? Nothing. All right. Okay, next one, example 4. I have 6x squared plus 11x. And let's see what else we got here. Plus 10 equals 20. There we go. All right. So, again, a quadratic because I have an x squared in here. All right. Now, I'm going to solve by factor, but I can't do that just yet. Anybody tell me why I can't do that just yet?
Because you need a 0 on the equal sign.
Right. So I'm going to move that 20 over. All right. So that 20 is getting moved over. All right. So now I have 6x squared plus 11x plus 10. And again, the 20 comes over, so it's changing signs, minus 20. All right, but again, when you are factoring a quadratic, I got to have 3 terms, unless it's a difference of squares. So I have to have my squared term, my x term, my number. So I'm going to put that 10 and that minus 20 together. And so I have 6x squared plus 11x. 10 minus 20 is a minus 10 equals 0. All right, so again, this is, I'm going to use my chart method to factor. All right, now it's going to be a little bit harder because I do not have a 1 in front of my x squared. All right, so, and I'm not looking at my answers because I like to do it in real time, see if I can get it right away, or if I'm going to mess it up. All right, so let's see here. So again, I put my first term in the top left, my last term in the top right. All right, so 6x squared. I'm just going to try a 3x and a 2x. There's 2 possibilities, right? We got a 2x and a 3x, or a 6x and a 1x. See what happens. Minus 10. I'm going to go with a 5 and a minus 2. See what happens. All right, so now I'm going to get my handkerchief ready here. Probably get this wrong, but we'll see. Let's see here. So again, doing a crisscross method, cross multiplying, add the terms together. I need 11x. So 5 times 2x, that's 10x. But then minus 6x. So that's going to give me a positive 4x. That ain't going to work. All right. So then sometimes what I like to do is just flip the numbers. Trial and error, right? Let's see. What did I do? Minus 2 here and a 5. All right. So now I try it out. I get 3x times 5, which is 15x. minus 2 times 2x, which is 4x. So 15x minus 4x's. Bingo, got it. That gives me my 11x. All right, so now I'm going to factor my quadratic. That's always the first step to solving. Well, not always, we'll get to that. There we go. So we're gonna have our two pieces. So the one piece is going to be the 3x minus 2. And the other piece is going to be the, going across horizontally here, 2x plus 5. All right, so there it is, it's factored. That's the first step. Well, not really the first step, but first main step. Second step now is using the zero product property. So I get my two equations. I got 3x minus 2 equals 0. It's one equation. And the other equation I'm going to get is a 2x plus 5 equals 0. All right, so now I just solve each equation. So let's bring the minus 2 over to the other side. So I get 3x equals 2. Divide by my numerical coefficient. There we go. So those 3's cancel each other out. And again, you can express your answer as either a fraction or a decimal. I'm going to go with decimal here just to change it up to 2 decimal places. 2/3 would be 0.666 repeating, so I'm going to round up to 2 decimal places, 0.67. There's one answer. I go back to the other side here to do the second equation. So I'm going to move that positive 5 over to the other side. So I have 2x equals negative 5. All right, and again, divide by my numerical coefficient. And again, I'll throw this one in as decimal. So those 2's divide each other out. And negative 5 divided by 2 is negative 2.5. And since this isn't a word problem, it's got no applications, I'm just stating my answers. 0.67 and negative 2.5 are my two answers. All right, any questions about that one? We only got one more here left.
Shouldn't you have cross multiplied instead of done it horizontally?
Sorry, say that again.
Shouldn't you have cross multiplied like you wrote 3x minus 2?
I only do cross multiplying to see if it's my middle term.
Oh, okay.
That's the only. That's what the cross multiplying is for. When I cross multiply and then add those two terms, they have to be the middle term. But then when I get that, then your factors you're going across horizontally. So on the test, last test, I saw that half of you basically use decomposition and then half of you use the chart method. So it's up to you. Again, that's the way I do it. It's easier because the chart method works for both very, very easily, very nicely. When you get used to it. All right, let's see here. Last one, another word problem. Example 5. All right, so let's see here. All right, so let's see here. We have the height of a flying squirrel here in example 5. All right, so the height of a flying squirrel is given by the equation. So I'm going to write it down here. We got h is equal to negative 4x squared plus 18x minus 6. All right, so there's our flying squirrel's height, where x is in time, or x is time again in seconds, and the height again is in meters. And I want to know when the height of the squirrel, or when is the squirrel at a height of 2 meters? All right, so when is the squirrel at a height of 2 meters, this flying squirrel? All right, so now again, when you have an equation, right now we have an h variable and an x variables. Well, I got x a couple times here, but we have 2 variables. And in this question, it's asking when is the height of the squirrel 2? All right, so last time we had a word problem was when you hit the ground, so that's secretly an h equals 0. Here it's just flat out telling you your height is 2 for the squirrel. All right, so I'm going to sub that in again. All right, so 2 is equal to negative 4x squared plus 18x minus 6. All right, but just like our last example, if I'm going to solve a quadratic equation, I got to get a 0 on one side. So I'm going to move that 2 over. All right, so now I have 0 is equal to negative 4x squared plus 18x minus 6. Now the 2 is coming over, so it's a minus 2. And once again, when I'm solving the quadratic here, by factoring, I got to get 3 terms, my x squared term, my x term, my numbers. So again, I'm going to put the negative 2 and this negative 6 together. All right, so there's the quadratic equation now that we can solve by factoring. Got everything together, got a 0 on one side. All right, so when I do factor this, I'm going to have my 2 pieces. All right, so again, I'm going to go over and do my chart. Go. My first term here, my negative 4x squared, top left-hand corner. My last term, the minus 8 in the other corner. Yikes, this one could be a tough one. All right, so again, I gotta, because there is not a 1 in front of the x squared, I'm gonna have to work both sides of my chart. Hopefully not too long, but we'll see what happens. So I guess negative 4x squared. Again, I always like to just try a couple right off the bat just to see how I'm doing. So I'm gonna go with negative 2x and 2x. They multiply to give me negative 4x squared. Negative 8, we're going to go with, let's go with 2 and negative 4. It's a lot of 2's going on there. All right, so let me check it out. So if I go negative 2x, because again, I'm doing a cross multiplying, adding those 2 terms and seeing if I get the 18x. So negative 2x times negative 4, that's an 8x. Then plus 4x down the other end. That's 12x. That's not going to do it. I need bigger numbers. All right, so let's switch this up here on this side. And let's try out negative 4x and an x. All right, so again, I go back, we can go back and forth, left and right, see what happens. In this case, I have a negative 4x times a negative 4. That's a positive 16x. Plus 2x going this way. So 16x plus 2x, that gives me the 18x. So cross multiplying and adding those 2 terms gives me the 18x. So again, to write in the factors, we go across horizontally. All right, so one of my terms is negative 4x plus 2. And x minus 4. There's my 2 factors. All right, and then lastly, well, not lastly, but next step, solving each piece here. So I have a negative 4x plus 2 equals 0, and I have an x minus 4 equals 0. Whoops, x minus 4 equals 0. There we go. All right, so I'm going to solve these 2 pieces. So I guess the first point here, I'm going to move the 2 over to the other side. So it's a minus 2. Again, divide by my numerical coefficient. Let's see here. A negative divided by negative. We're going to get a positive, and well, 2 divided by 4 is 0.5. There's one answer. I move the negative 4 over to the other side. I get a positive 4. And so I got, again, it's a word problem, so I have to interpret my answers. And so when is the squirrel at a height of 2 meters? I'd love to write this down. They're not going to have room. After 0.5 seconds and after 0.4 seconds, or after 4 seconds. So we have 2 answers. They are both valid because time's positive. Essentially, in this case, when you look at this equation, or when we get to looking at the equation a little bit more, is that one answer is the squirrel on the way up, and the other one's the squirrel on the way down. Now, with this question, this is something that came up last unit. When you factor this, there was actually 2 answers. All right, so here's my one table that works. All right, but there was another table that works. All right, so I'm going to draw that in there. So I want to show you something. So again, negative 4x squared and minus 8. The other one would be minus 2x here and a positive 1. Negative 8 here and a 2x here. believe that's the one. So let me check it to make sure. Negative 2x times negative 8 is a 16x once again, plus 2x. That still gives me the 18x. So this table would work. Now, here's why I want to show you that, because no matter which table you got in factoring, these two answers are going to end up the same. So if I had this table here, my first equation would be negative 2x plus 1 equals 0. All right, and then I'd have 2x minus 8 equals 0. And if I solved these two equations, so again, I could bring the 1 over to the other side, and it'd be a minus 1. Divide both sides by my numerical coefficient. And again, I would get x equals 0.5. Again, solving the other equation, if I bring the negative 8 over to the other side, it's a positive 8. Divide both sides by my numerical coefficient. And again, I'm going to get a 4. So again, when you factor, sometimes there is two possible answers, but in the end, when you solve, you are still going to get the same answer. So it doesn't matter. As long as you factor properly, you'll get the same answers. All right, so again, you got to be able to factor to solve, which we did last unit. Again, this is your second shot at it if it didn't go so well for you. If it did go well for you, well then, hey, you've got half of this lesson beat already. All right, but again, with the word problems, you got to make sure that you analyze the answers, write a therefore statement, which I should have written here, but I don't have room, where I'd say, therefore, the squirrel is at a height of 2 meters after a half a second and after 4 seconds. And again, one's on the way up, one's on the way down. So sometimes we have two answers that are applicable, and just like our hot air balloon, only one answer was possible. So that can happen too.